After a summer of controversy, lawmakers leave Austin making one last major change impacting every public school student in Texas.
It's always the uncertainty. No one likes the STAAR test.
They repeal and replace the STAAR test.
One gigantic test one day that has so much riding on it is a problem.
We talk next steps with the man at the center of negotiations.
We are seeing that Democrats are making a difference across the country. I mean, how many people get to say that?
Then will any punishment against the Democrats for breaking quorum hold up in court? We get expert insight.
The governor is being put in an interesting position by all this because, of course, these are not just legal battles, they're also political battles.
And the race for U.S. Senate edges closer as two titans of Texas politics duke it out in a very public way.
This is Lone Star Politics from NBC5 and the Dallas Morning News.
A second special session in Austin wraps up early, but it remains to be seen if more action will come from the 89th legislature. Good Sunday morning. I'm Phil Prazen from NBC5.
And I'm Gromer Jeffers, political writer with the Dallas Morning News. From flooding and safety to congressional redistricting, lawmakers addressed several of the items Governor Abbott put on the agenda.
While others, including property taxes and a push to ban THC in Texas, those were left on the table. Listen to what Governor Abbott said on Friday.
THC, the hemp products that didn't get done, are you willing to wait till 27, or you can maybe thinking about a callback sometime around January?
I would say stay tuned on that. Something may be happening soon.
The governor made the comment after signing into law a camp safety bill 2 months after catastrophic flooding swept through central Texas, killing 27 campers and counselors at Camp Mystic. Families impacted by the 4th of July floods joined him at the governor's mansion. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick gave some emotional remarks.
In their time of need and pain, they were gracious to Drew and the governor and the speaker and Senator Perry, never wanting to burden us, just to ask us to do this. We sign about 1,100 bills this session, Governor. These are the most important.
Under the new law, residential cabins cannot exist in a floodplain or 1,000 feet from the border of a floodplain. Before passing the bills, 3 Hill Country camps sent a letter opposing portions of the bill, arguing they are not financially able to comply by moving cabins and dorms out of floodplains.
The governor also signed into law legislation that will end the controversial STAAR test. In 2 years, the Texas Education Agency will roll out a new testing system. Many Democrats voted against the bill because it gives TEA the power to create this new test.
We spoke with the bill author, Representative Brad Buckley of Salado. He and other Republicans argued change was better than the status quo. And here's part of that conversation.
You've been working on this for years. There was a deal that we thought was going to happen in the regular session, and it kind of fell apart at the last second. Why did it happen this time?
You know, I think because we were able to move the needle even further than what we had at the end of the regular session. You know, this bill really reflects a lot of the priorities that Texas House has for accountability and assessment in the future. And, you know, I think everything happens for a reason, and I believe that the way the regular session ended and then be able to take it up again, we were really able to do some really good things for kids.
What was the last hurdle to get over?
You know, I think it's always the uncertainty. You know, nobody, you know, no one likes the STAAR test, but it's always about, you know, so you really, and there are others that really, they like A through F even less. So a lot of the resistance to the testing part is really resistance to A through F, not necessarily the tests. But we do know that the current system of one gigantic test one day that has so much riding on it is a problem.
There's now 3 tests, a beginning, middle, and end of year test. They all are still connected in some way to the A through F accountability system. How do you ensure that these low stakes tests don't over time become high stakes tests?
And remember, The first two tests are what are called adaptive, meaning if a kid struggles, they get a little easier. If a kid really is flying high, they get harder. So it's extremely diagnostic in that sense. And it's really going to, I think, create a very clear roadmap for teachers. At the end of the day, the final test is about how far did we get in learning the state standards. But we also know some of our best teaching occurs when we have kids that are way behind and that they grow a tremendous amount. And we see that all over Texas. And so for the first time ever, we'll have this 3-year growth measure that will be the beginning of the year to the end of the year. And that will be extremely powerful in terms of our accountability system.
Chairman, are you comfortable that this new system, and it starts in 2027, right? The 2020. Are you comfortable that it fits with what you want with accountability?
You know, districts across Texas have told me, hey, I don't care what the rules are necessarily. I just want to know what they are. And so, you know, the bill goes into great detail on making sure there are lots of eyeballs, not just TEA, that there's legislators, that there are teachers, school leaders, community members. They're all in statute of who has eyeballs on this, and we're able to have unprecedented oversight as to how this rolls out.
There's stress with any system, right? But I would imagine that students and teachers, to have them feel more comfortable about taking tests is a plus. What do you think?
Absolutely. You know, and I think that, you know, the benefit, you know, and there's been pushback, well, it's more tests. What will happen because the bill prohibits excessive benchmarking, except for the ones that are required, you'll see less testing. But when you align those tests to the standards and that information that teachers receive is more actionable, but also where a student is really being assessed over what the standards are. Because too often what we hear is, oh my gosh, the STAAR test was way too hard. And if you really dig into that, what you'll find is that they weren't assessed over the proper standards, because it's hard to do that. This bill requires that those assessments, which districts will have a menu to choose from, a lot of local control over that, but it will require that these assessments meet those standards. So it's not a shock to the system, if you will, when you get to the end of the year, because our students have seen this as they progress through a school year.
One of the last major hurdles to get over in the debate was the Texas House. You guys stripped out the social studies test in 8th grade to be a part of the accountability system. The Senate put it back in. You guys accepted then those changes. What was the debate over that social studies test?
Well, we did remove the English 2 end of course exam, which is the first test removed since 2015. So we did agree with the Senate on that. Well, you know, members heard from folks all over concerning removing U.S. history and social studies. We heard from some you know, citizens that thought, you know, we need to be assessing this because, you know, civics and our history is important, and it is. But we also heard from school districts, a lot of school districts that felt like that it was a subject matter that their kids were excelling at, that history was interesting and kids were engaged, and they wanted to be able to assess them. And so, you know, that's where we ended up being and where the Senate ended up being. And, you know, I thought that there was, you know, some debate over that, but it wasn't as big a deal as I thought.
What will you be watching as this all becomes reality?
Watching them every step of the way. You know, it's the first time the legislature is going to have real eyes on the system. And, you know, that's my job is to watch it, to challenge them at every turn, to make sure that this is implemented in a fashion that it was intended. I answered a lot of questions from the back mic last night about the legislative intent, and that's what we intend to do. And so I am absolutely certain that we will implement this in a smart way that will be better for kids.
So, Gromer, the STAAR test, that's going to be a big deal across the state. But lawmakers left Austin early. They could have gone until September 13th. They left a week and a half early. Why did they do that?
It shows you that they were ready to go. 2 special sessions, and when you add them up in the past few years, there've been a lot of special sessions. So they've had enough, and they probably figured that they couldn't get to where they needed to get on the other issues, and felt like if the governor calls us back, we'll deal with it then. But for now, we're going home.
THC, property taxes,
Yes.
some kind of police records laws. Those are still on the table.
All stuff that can be kicked down the road.
And just the change in the public dialogue, I would challenge you to find somebody who doesn't know what redistricting is today.
And I believe they have forfeited their seats in the state legislature because they're not doing the job they were elected to do.
The nation turned to the Texas legislature this summer as a Democratic quorum break derailed the first attempt to pass controversial new congressional maps. Governor Abbott muscled through the new maps in the second special session, but it launched a nationwide struggle reaching to California and now even Missouri. Republicans promised punishment for the quorum breaking. Democrats back at home. They changed the House rules and passed a new law.
The fallout doesn't stop there. Governor Abbott and Attorney General Ken Paxton continue to try to remove Democrats from office. In petitions with the Supreme Court of Texas, they aim for the chair of the Democratic Party and others who broke quorum.
But will any of this hold up in court? We speak to lawyer and historian Dr. Bill Criss.
He wrote a book on the 6 constitutions of the state of Texas and has been keeping a close eye on this struggle.
And they passed a law that if somebody breaks quorum, they cannot fundraise more than their per diem, which is roughly $220 a day. And then it also bans them from spending political money on housing, travel, food, for quorum breaking. Do you think that's going to hold up? Is that allowed under the Texas Constitution?
You know, that's an open question. There's no guiding authority that we have that will tell us the answer to that question. I can tell you the two sides of the coin. The first side of the coin is the Texas Constitution makes it very clear that the legislature has the constitutional authority and power to regulate its own members. So the Constitution says that the legislature, each house of the legislature, has the right to discipline its members, to expel its members, to regulate the conduct of its members, to discipline its members. So the Constitution, in addition, has a separation of powers provision, which we don't have in the federal Constitution, that makes it even more likely that deference will be shown by the courts to whatever the legislature decides to do about its own discipline. The other side of the coin is that under Citizens United, the United States Supreme Court decision that essentially equated money with speech under the First Amendment, there may be a challenge to this law, which I think is House Bill 18. There may be a challenge to this law based on Citizens United, because not so much the idea of not being able to raise funds, but particularly the restrictions on what they can be used for.
And just to double click on that, because the Texas House also passed some rules that said every day you're gone on a quorum break, you lose 2 years of seniority, and your loss of a chair or vice chair position, also a fine of 3 times their per diem. So it will be roughly 660 days. That you feel like has more legal standing because it's like internal House rules, but this state law that may question some of the political expenditures, that may be more vulnerable to a court challenge. Am I understanding that correctly?
The internal rules of each house are probably going to be given more deference by federal courts and state courts because of the separation of powers doctrine at the federal level and the separation of powers express provision in the Texas Constitution. But even those House rules, if they go too far, could transgress constitutional boundaries.
Yeah, and when they broke quorum, there were efforts and talk about removing them from office and all of that kind of business. Is that legal? How strong is the ability for lawmakers to use quorum breaks as a political tactic?
I think that it's a time-honored method of legislators expressing their will in extreme situations. The first instance of it that I know of is 1870, when the legislature did essentially that. Some members of the legislature did essentially the same thing. The business about removing the legislators from office because they refuse to appear is something that I think is based on a very weak legal argument. You would have to, the Supreme Court of Texas would have to overrule existing precedent, guiding precedent that goes back to the 1920s on the subject of implied resignation. Because the argument here is that when these guys and gals leave, they're essentially abandoning their office, right? In order to demonstrate or prove that a legislator has abandoned her office, you have to demonstrate that they left the legislature with the intention of never coming back and of giving up their office. So it's kind of a situation where you have to prove they are resigning without actually saying so. And that's going to be very hard to prove under circumstances where the quorum-busting legislators expressly disclaim that that's what they're doing. No, I'm not resigning. I'm doing what my constituents elected me to do.
All right, it looks like someone we speak with often has a new job. State Senator Brandon Creighton is off to Lubbock. On Thursday, he was named the sole finalist for the Texas Tech University System Chancellor, Gromer.
That's a good job.
As chair of the Senate Committee on Education, K through 16, Creighton has passed major changes to K through 12 public schools and higher education.
This week, voters in Virginia will vote for a new representative following the death of Democratic Congressman Gerald Connolly. There are a total of 4 vacancies in Congress, including one here in Texas. Republicans currently hold a slim majority, 219 to 212.
And those numbers could impact the 2026 midterm election. Here in North Texas, 3 Democrats are thinking about their next moves following the passage of new congressional district maps, expected to give Republicans 5 more seats in Congress after President Trump asked for changes. This is headed to court for now, but Mark Vesey of Fort Worth, Julie Johnson of Farmers Branch, and Jasmine Crockett of Dallas must prepare to run in one of the only two, Gromer, new districts or another elected office.
Meanwhile, a double-digit lead nearly cut in half the race for Senate between Attorney General Ken Paxton and the longtime incumbent Senator John Cornyn gets more hostile every day. Just a couple of months ago, my headline in the Dallas Morning News, Paxton is the front runner. He was up nearly 10 points according to a Texas Southern University poll, but things have changed. According to a mid-August Emerson College survey, Cornyn is 1 point ahead of Paxton. Several other polls show Paxton up by single digits.
A lot of this change comes from a barrage of attack ads highlighting Paxton's past controversies. The latest campaign effort, Cornyn is calling Ken stoppers. Trucks with digital signs call for people to provide information about the Attorney General. There is a hotline and a website set up for anonymous tips. Now, I reached out to the Paxton campaign to ask him to come on the show or if they had a response to these recent attacks. They pointed me to his recent interview on Fox News.
I think the voters of Texas are pretty smart, especially Republican voters. In a primary, they know what John Cornyn hasn't done. They know what he has done. They know that he's voted against them on Second Amendment issues. He's not been a Donald Trump supporter. He's not been a border wall supporter. He's been against the issues that most Texans have really cared about a lot. That's going to come out in this election. And even though he's being dishonest about his record, we'll have enough money to talk to the voters and tell them the truth about his record and my record.
Gromer, Senator Cornyn is making some headway in the campaign with these attacks on Paxton. Also, Paxton's wife, State Senator Angela Paxton, filed for divorce during this whole change in the polls. Which do you think had more of an impact for Paxton's numbers?
I think they all played a role in it because Cornyn's mission, he feels, is to try to show voters that Paxton is, quote, unfit for office, if that's the case. And in order to do that, he has to take advantage of the divorce filing, but also the barrage of attacks that he's lobbying. But the key question is, what happens when Paxton starts communicating with voters and spending money? Does the race go back to where it was? Or what? And we'll know.
This is going to be so nasty in the next couple months.
It's going to be brutal.
That's all the time we have. Stay tuned for Meet the Press with Kristen Welker.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you back here next week for more Lone Star Politics.